Everyone talks about raising your vibration like it's something you add. Another practice, another crystal, another morning routine designed to lift you into some higher frequency you can post about. But Carl Jung would have looked at the entire conversation and pointed in the opposite direction. You don't rise by accumulating more. You rise by releasing what's been sitting on your chest your whole life. Weight you mistook for your own body. Jung never used the word vibration. The marketplace borrowed that language from physics and stripped it of meaning. But what Jung described over decades of work with patients points to the same lived experience people are reaching for when they talk about frequency. He observed that the people who lived with what he called inner clarity, that distinct quality of presence others can sense across a room, had almost nothing in common in terms of belief, practice, or lifestyle. What they shared was an absence. They were carrying less. They had let certain things go that the rest of the world was still hauling around like furniture in a house they'd already moved out of. The vibration you're trying to raise isn't blocked by what you haven't yet learned. It's compressed under what you haven't yet released. And the heaviness most people interpret as their natural emotional baseline is actually accumulated material that was never theirs to carry in the first place. They just absorbed it so young, so completely, that they came to believe it was who they were. Today I'm going to walk you through 5 specific things Jung's framework would identify as the heaviest weights a person carries. 5 releases that don't require you to become someone new, but require you to stop pretending to be someone you were never meant to be in the first place. Each one is harder to release than it sounds. Each one will cost you something. And each one, when it finally goes, will leave you lighter than you've been since childhood. Let's start with the first, because it might be the heaviest of them all. The first thing to release is the need to be understood. This one runs so deep that most people don't even register it as a weight. They experience it as a baseline condition of being human, the assumption that the people in your life should understand you, and that being misunderstood is a problem to be solved through better communication, more explanation, clearer articulation. So you spend years of your life explaining, defending, clarifying, re-explaining the same hurt to the same person who keeps responding to it the same way. And every round of explanation drains something from you, though you can't quite name what. Jung watched this pattern in his patients with a kind of quiet sadness. He recognized that the compulsive need to be understood was almost always a residue of childhood, specifically the experience of growing up around people who couldn't or wouldn't see who you actually were. The child who isn't seen develops a survival strategy. Try harder, speak louder, find better words. Eventually, the adult version of that child believes that if they just communicate well enough, the people around them will finally get it. And then they'll feel real. They'll feel valid. They'll feel like they exist. But Jung observed something brutal about this strategy. The people who couldn't see you when you were small almost never develop the capacity to see you when you're grown. Not because they don't love you, because the inability to perceive certain things runs deeper than love. They're looking at you through a lens shaped before you arrived, and your explanations don't change the lens. They just exhaust you. Releasing this need doesn't mean giving up on connection. It means giving up on a very specific fantasy. The fantasy that certain people will eventually understand you if you find the right words. Some won't. Most won't. And the energy you've been spending trying to make them is the same energy that could be flowing into your actual life, into the work that matters to you, into the relationships where being seen isn't an achievement, but a starting point. Jung would tell you that the moment you stop needing to be understood by people who've shown you they can't see you, something in your psyche relaxes that's been clenched for decades. The weight goes, and what fills the space isn't loneliness. It's the strange spaciousness of being allowed, finally, to just exist without translation. The second thing to release is the version of you that was built to be liked. Jung called this the persona, the social mask that gets you through the world. He wasn't against the persona. He understood that having one is part of functional adulthood. You don't show up to a job interview as your full, undifferentiated self. You don't bring your raw psychological material to the grocery store. The persona has uses. The problem starts when the persona becomes the whole house, when the mask fuses to the face, when the version of you that was built to be liked, approved of, accepted, becomes the only version you have access to. And Jung watched this happen to people constantly. They'd performed acceptability for so long that they no longer had any felt sense of who they were when the performance dropped. They'd ask him, quietly, near the end of a session, "Who am I when I'm not being good?" The persona is heavy precisely because it's calibrated to other people's nervous systems rather than your own. You have to constantly monitor it, adjust it, make sure it's working. Notice whether it's getting the response it needs. This monitoring runs in the background of every interaction, every email, every conversation, a low-grade vigilance you've been carrying so long you've stopped noticing it, until you put it down. Then you realize how exhausted you were. Releasing the persona doesn't mean becoming difficult or rude or antisocial. Jung was careful about this distinction. It means letting your actual responses come through instead of pre-filtering them for palatability. It means saying what's true even when the true thing is unimpressive. It means letting silences exist without rushing to fill them with whatever performance would make everyone comfortable. This release terrifies people because the persona has been getting them love and approval their whole lives. They worry that without it, no one will stay. And here's the part Jung was honest about. Some people won't. The people who loved the performance often have no interest in the person underneath it. That loss is real. But the people who do stay, who actually want to know the version of you that exists when you're not performing, those connections will have a quality the persona-based ones never could. The vibration that lifts when the persona drops isn't a frequency you generated. It's the absence of the constant low-grade static the performance was producing. You feel lighter because you actually are. The third thing to release is the resentment you've been rehearsing. Jung had a particular way of looking at long-held resentments that most people find uncomfortable. He didn't see resentment as something to be processed through expression. He saw it as something the psyche keeps alive through rehearsal, and he noticed that the rehearsal itself was the weight. Think about a specific resentment you've been carrying. Probably one comes to mind immediately, which tells you something about how present it is. Now notice how often you replay it, the conversation you wish you'd had, the thing they did that still doesn't sit right, the way they looked at you that confirmed what you already suspected. Each replay feels like processing, like you're working through it. But Jung would point out that what's actually happening is more like sharpening a blade you keep in your pocket and cut yourself with daily. The resentment doesn't stay alive because the wound is fresh. It stays alive because you keep returning to it. And the reason you keep returning to it, the part Jung found most important, is that the resentment is doing psychological work for you. It's organizing your sense of who you are. It positions you as the wronged one, which carries a certain identity. It explains why your life looks the way it does. It gives you something to push against. This is the part of shadow work that people don't want to do. Looking at how a resentment has been useful, how it's been performing a function, how you've kept it around not because the other person did something unforgivable, but because forgiveness, or even neutrality, would require you to take responsibility for the present in ways the resentment lets you avoid. Releasing resentment, in Jung's framework, isn't reaching some lofty state of forgiveness. You don't have to forgive anyone. You just have to stop rehearsing. Stop the daily return to the wound. Stop the conversations in the shower where you finally tell them what they should have heard. Each rehearsal is a vote to keep the weight. Each refusal to rehearse is a vote to set it down. You'll notice it tries to come back. That's normal. The psyche reaches for familiar patterns the way the body reaches for familiar food. But every time you notice the rehearsal beginning and gently redirect your attention, the grooves get a little shallower, and one day, you'll realize you haven't replayed that scene in weeks, and the weight that always lived in your chest when you thought about that person is just gone. Not because anything changed externally, because you stopped carrying it. The fourth thing to release is the version of you who was supposed to become someone specific. Almost everyone is carrying a ghost. The ghost is the person they were supposed to become, the version their parents imagined, the version their younger self promised, the version their culture said they should aspire to. This ghost lives alongside the actual self, and it's almost always heavier than the body that's carrying it. Jung worked with people in their 40s and 50s who were still trying to become someone whose blueprint was drawn before they were old enough to consent to it. The doctor who was supposed to make the family proud. The good daughter who was supposed to stay close to home. The successful one who was supposed to validate every sacrifice their parents made. These weren't bad goals on their own. They were just goals that belonged to other people, absorbed so early that they felt like personal ambition. And here's what Jung observed. You can spend your whole life chasing a version of yourself that was never yours. And even when you catch it, even when you become the doctor or the successful one or whoever you were supposed to be, the satisfaction doesn't arrive. Because the achievement was always for someone else. The applause goes to a ghost. You're left holding a trophy for a competition you never wanted to enter. Releasing this ghost is harder than it sounds because it's been driving your decisions for so long that you've confused it with desire. You might not know what you actually want once the ghost stops dictating. There's a period of disorientation that comes with that. Jung called it the loss of false direction. And he warned that it would feel like loss before it felt like freedom. People sometimes panic in that gap. They try to find a new identity quickly to fill the space, but the space is supposed to be there for a while. What emerges, if you can tolerate the emptiness, is something quieter than ambition. Not the absence of direction, but a different kind of direction. One that comes from somewhere lower in the body, lower in the psyche, that doesn't sound like your parents or your culture or your 18-year-old self. It sounds like you. And it's been waiting underneath the ghost the whole time, occasionally tapping on the floorboards, trying to be heard. The vibration that lifts when this ghost is released is significant because so much of your life force was being channeled into a project that wasn't yours. When you stop chasing the wrong life, the energy that was driving that pursuit becomes available for the actual one. If you're sensing that some of these releases describe weights you've been carrying without realizing it, our guide, True Self-Discovery, was built for exactly this kind of work. 24 reflection exercises rooted in Jung's approach, designed to help you locate what you've been hauling around and start the slow work of setting it down. The link is right below this video. Worth a look if any of this is landing close to home. The fifth thing to release is the relationships that require you to stay small. This is the heaviest weight for last, because releasing it costs the most. Jung observed that most adult relationships are calibrated to a specific version of you, the version that existed when the relationship formed. If you formed a friendship at 17 when you were anxious and self-deprecating, that friendship has probably been operating on the assumption that you're still anxious and self-deprecating. If you got into a relationship at 25 when you were eager to please and afraid of conflict, the relationship has probably been organized around that being who you are. When you start to change, when you actually start releasing the persona and the ghost and the rehearsed resentments, the relationships calibrated to your old self begin to register the difference. And Jung noticed that the response is almost never neutral. The system pushes back. People who loved the smaller version of you start interpreting your expansion as a problem. They might frame it as you becoming difficult, selfish, distant, not yourself anymore. What they mean, though they almost never have the awareness to say it directly, is that you're no longer playing the role their nervous system relied on. Your shrinking was useful to them in ways they were never required to examine. Your apologetic energy gave them room to expand. Your willingness to absorb their moods spared them from regulating themselves. Your reliable availability meant they never had to develop other resources. The relationships built on your smallness can sometimes adjust. Some people, when they realize what they've been doing, are willing to do the work to meet you at your actual size. But Jung was clear-eyed about this. Most won't. Not because they're cruel, because the relationship served them in its current form, and they have no internal motivation to renegotiate the terms. Releasing these relationships doesn't always mean ending them. Sometimes it means letting them become smaller, less central, less invested. You might still see the person at family gatherings, still attend the same events, still maintain the connection at a surface level. But the place they used to occupy in your inner life, the constant background hum of their needs and moods and expectations, that place empties out, and you stop using your psychological resources to maintain a connection that was draining them faster than you were replenishing. This release is the heaviest because it touches grief. You're mourning not just the person, but the version of yourself that they loved, the you that they wanted you to remain. There's a real loss in letting that go, even when you know that staying small was killing something essential. But Jung was unflinching about what he'd seen. The people who couldn't release these relationships almost always plateaued in their psychological development. They might do all the inner work in the world. They might process and reflect and integrate. But as long as they kept returning daily to a relational field that required them to be smaller than they were, the field would win. The gravity of the relationship would pull them back into the old shape every time. Whereas the people who could release, who could either end the relationship or let it become peripheral, who could stop offering themselves up as raw material for someone else's comfort, those people experience something Jung called the relief of repatriation, like coming home to themselves after being a foreigner in their own life. The vibration that lifts when these relationships are released isn't about feeling better in some bright, marketable way. It's about reclaiming the psychological territory that other people have been occupying rent-free. Suddenly, there's room inside you. Room to think your own thoughts. Room to feel your own feelings. Room to have desires that aren't filtered through whether someone else will approve. So those are the 5. The need to be understood. The persona built to be liked. The resentments you've been rehearsing. The ghost of who you were supposed to become. The relationships calibrated to your smallness. 5 weights that most people carry their entire lives without realizing they're optional. What Jung would want you to notice is that releasing them isn't a project you complete. It's a practice you return to. Each one will try to come back. The need to be understood will reassert itself the next time you feel misread by someone you love. The persona will slip back on when you walk into a room where being yourself feels too risky. The resentment will sharpen the next time you replay an old wound. The ghost will whisper that you should have been further along by now. The old relationships will pull at your boundaries. The work isn't to release these things once and be done. The work is to notice when you've picked them back up and set them down again, with less drama each time, less story, less analysis, just the simple recognition, I'm carrying this, I don't have to, and then the lowering of the weight. Jung wouldn't have called this raising your vibration. He would have called it something more modest, coming into your own psychological gravity, standing at your actual weight in the world, which is less than you've been carrying, but more than you've been pretending to be. The vibrational language people use today is reaching for the same experience he was describing in different words. The sense of clarity, the sense of presence, the sense of being who you are rather than who you've been performing or apologizing for or trying to escape. What lifts isn't your frequency, it's the load. And what people perceive when they sense someone with that quality isn't a higher state. It's the rare visibility of a person who isn't being weighed down by something invisible. They've put the invisible weight down. And in a culture where most people are carrying enormous loads they can't name, the absence of that weight reads as light. You can be that person. Jung believed nearly everyone could, given enough honesty and enough willingness to look at what they've been hauling around. The releases aren't reserved for the gifted or the spiritual or the chosen. They're available to anyone willing to do the slow, unglamorous work of noticing what they're carrying and asking whether it's actually theirs. Start with 1, not all 5. The weight of trying to release everything at once becomes its own burden. Pick the one that resonated most as you listened. The one where something in your chest tightened in recognition. That's the one your psyche is already pointing toward. Begin there. Sit with it for a while. Notice how it shows up. Notice when you reach for it. And gently, without forcing anything, start to set it down. The chapter of your life that begins when these weights start coming off doesn't announce itself dramatically. It arrives quietly. You'll notice you're sleeping a little deeper, that conversations don't drain you the way they used to, that the constant low-grade exhaustion you'd come to accept as normal has started lifting, that you have energy for things you'd forgotten you wanted. That's the vibration the marketplace has been trying to sell you in courses and crystals and curated content. It was never something to acquire. It was always something underneath everything you've been carrying, waiting for you to put enough of it down to feel what was there the whole time. If any of what we've covered here has landed close to home, if you recognized one of these weights as yours, or if you're already starting to feel the shifting of something you've been carrying too long, our guide, True Self-Discovery, offers 24 reflection exercises drawn from Jung's framework, built for exactly this work. Slow, honest, practical reflection on what you've been carrying and what it might mean to release it. You'll find the link below. Move at your own pace. The weight has been with you a long time. Setting it down doesn't have to happen all at once.